So perhaps we can just start out with, obviously everyone saw the chocolate bar that you gave to President Biden today.
Yeah.
It became something that a lot of people were talking about. But I guess more seriously, what does this trip mean to you and to the Green Party that President Biden has now come to Canada, something that we've been waiting for a while?
I will admit to being a very big fan of President Joe Biden, and I thanked him for canceling the Keystone Pipeline. That was an election promise he made, and he followed through on his election promise. And I also thanked him for appointing John Kerry to a senior position in White House security, because John Kerry, former Secretary of State under President Obama, John Kerry is doing a lot of wonderful work on global climate negotiations, and I've come to know him from the Paris negotiations, and then every year, sort of see him. So last time I saw him was in Glasgow last year. I just think the world of the way in which, the work that John Kerry does, and the fact that President Biden, and I wish our Prime Minister would do this, President Biden understands that the climate threat is a security threat, and it should be treated like a security issue with a lot more attention and focus. And unfortunately, when governments think something is an environmental issue, it gets to be treated as it's lesser in importance than big issues like security. So I was also pleased today to hear in Prime Minister Trudeau's speech constantly coming back to the theme that climate issues are security issues, economic issues, and we have to actually focus on climate.
So perhaps we can just start out with, obviously, the fact that President Biden has came to Canada. How significant is that?
Well, I think it's a lovely visit. Anytime a president comes to our country, I think it's a major event. I think it says a lot about the relationship between our two countries. Always nice when an American president visits.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Good
to see you. Thank you. Perhaps we could just start out with, obviously, the ongoing allegations of Chinese election interference.
Yes.
To your knowledge, and with what's been going on, obviously, Katie Telford, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, now testifying.
Yeah.
What do you make of all of this?
Well, Trudeau just needs to call public inquiry, end the cover-up, tell the truth. We need to know exactly what he knew about Beijing's attempts to keep him in power and to support the Liberal Party. We need to know about which, if any, of his caucus members are implicated, and we need answers under oath so that Canadians know that our democracy is secure. In other words, let's bring home control of our democracy.
And obviously you had a quick pull-aside meeting, as it was called, with President Biden today. Do you think that this visit accomplished what it needed to?
No, I don't. We needed to get an end to Buy America and to the softwood tariffs, and he got neither. So it's a disappointment, but Trudeau has been bulldozed by the Americans for the last 8 years, and it's unfortunate that he can't seem to deliver any results. It's time to bring it home.
And just lastly, broadly speaking, what does it mean for Canada-U.S. relations?
I don't think it means much, frankly, because not a lot was achieved substantially, but it is good to have an American president here. They're our best friends, our closest neighbors, biggest economy in the world, and we got to work together. It's our top job, so let's bring it home. Thanks.
Rob, obviously you were there as part of the Canadian delegation to greet President Biden as he got off the plane and as he was coming and officially getting started with his visit to Canada. What do you think this visit, meant going into it, and what do you think it means now that it's almost done?
I think the whole visit is really about making sure that Canada and the United States firm up the relationship always, because there's always going to be some irritants. We remind each other of the importance that we have. We have economic relationships. We have relationship when it comes to the illegal war of Russia and Ukraine. We're looking at world issues together. And I think what this reminds us is how well the Prime Minister and President Biden get along, and everyone around them then works harder.
And in terms of the issues, obviously there's a lot of issues that Canadians are talking about. Obviously you have the election interference stories, you have just the, broadly speaking, the relationship between Canada and the U.S. And then you have, topics that come up like every, visit with a world leader, trade, etc. When looking at those issues, how do you think they have been met with this visit?
I think on a brief visit like this is about relationship. So out of that relationship, then all the officials, the ministers, the secretaries in the United States can then have an agenda go ahead. So very few things get finalized at a meeting like this. You have one day, but people have been working on things up to this point. They'll work on them afterwards. And this is about our shared values and how we work on them together.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob. Ambassador, obviously President Biden is now here in Canada, but it marks, obviously an occasion for Canada that has been, a long time coming. Obviously, a lot of people have been looking forward to it. But I want to get your take on, obviously countries like Russia, China, who seem to be turning an increasingly blind eye to the democratic process. What does it mean that, President Vladimir Putin and President Xi Jinping met, but now President Biden and Prime Minister Trudeau are meeting? Obviously, two very different messages.
Well, it is. I mean, theirs is an alliance in blood. Ours is an alliance of friendship. There's nothing brutal about our relationship. I think we have to recognize the world's in a tough spot at the moment, and it's important that Canada and America stand together on a number of issues. We work hard together. We work hard effectively. We do at the UN. We do in a number of other places, and we have a very strong alliance. But it's based on mutual interest and strong friendship. I think that's a very important difference between what's going on between Russia and China.
And just before you go, obviously the visit to Canada by President Biden, lots of issues were discussed. One of those issues obviously being national security, being, the growing state of polarization, etc. What can be done to, reduce the polarization and increase the national security of Canadians?
Well, I think, first of all, our security is based on our values, based on our freedom. That's what brings us together. It's not a security that's based on fear or based on tyranny. And I think, again, that's a significant difference with other countries. The world, we've been through a lot since 1945. The fact is we've lived with communist tyranny in other countries for a long, long time. We're simply seeing that tyranny take on a new form. And we're going to have to continue to work together closely with our allies around the world, not just in North America, but throughout the Americas and Europe and Africa and Asia. There are many countries which share our values, and we have to keep working for those values. That's the way it is.
Prime Minister, obviously this marks, quite a big milestone. The fact that President Biden has now came to Canada. He's getting ready to leave Canada tonight. What does it mean that he, came to Canada during such a, unprecedented time?
There's a very strong relation between Canada and the United States. There has been historically for a long time. I think most people who become president recognize that. He would have been here before had circumstances allowed that. But he knows the country. He's been in office himself a long time. He's worked with Canada before for a long time, and he knows that relationship is valuable to him. It is to us, of course, as well, and he would understand that.
And obviously, it's in the midst of a lot of issues that are, arising that are super important to people. Obviously, you have recently these ongoing allegations of Chinese election interference. Do you think that President Biden has accomplished what he needs to accomplish when visiting Canada?
Yes, I think let's be clear about the purpose of these meetings when heads of government meet. They are to sometimes discuss very difficult and divisive issues in private, but they are also in public to underline the abundance of things we have in common. I thought that's what was happening today. I think there is, without question, serious discussion on a private basis between Canadian authorities and American authorities. Some of that became evident in some of the announcements that have been made.
So, Prime Minister, what did you think of President Biden's speech?
It was a good speech, a very friendly speech, and make the people feel good.
And
so it's good policy.
And do you think the issues that he touched on were the issues that he needed to touch on?
Yes, I don't think many other things that he could have done, perhaps, but he made his decision and he made a speech, and that was a good speech. Cannot speak forever, so he had limited of time, and so no, I was happy. I hope you were too.
So perhaps just start out, what does this visit mean for Canada that President Biden is now here?
It means friendship. It means when your best friend takes time out of his day and he travels to go visit you, it's a show and demonstration about how much you care. When you care about somebody, he'd take time to spend a little time with him, and that's what he did. It was great.
And I mean, do you think the mission as to why he came has been accomplished, given that we're now basically at the end of his trip after tonight?
I think so. I mean, you can just see the smiles and the energy in Parliament, the announcements that are coming out as we speak, for all the agreements that they've been working on together, and now tonight, just a celebration, a good dinner, a recognition, and, I think it's fit everything that both parties had looked for.
Greg Fergus is Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister. Greg, obviously a lot of stuff has happened on this visit. I want to touch on the issue of the election interference story. And I know you weren't necessarily a part of, the bilateral meetings and stuff that happened between the President and the Prime Minister, but how important was it for the Prime Minister, for example, to, say, raise some of these issues potentially with President Biden?
Well, I think it's very important because, of course, we're strong allies and we work together. We share a lot of intelligence together. We do that through the Five Eyes network. We also, as the President had pointed out, we do that through NORAD, through the only binational defense organization that exists in the world. So this, I think it was important for the Prime Minister, of course, to raise these issues with President Biden and to work together.
Adam, obviously President Biden met with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, amongst many other members of the Canadian delegation. You're obviously the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health, and part of that portfolio would be overseeing some things relating to COVID-19, which is one of the reasons this trip didn't happen until so far along into President Biden's term. What does it mean that he is now here, that the visit is now almost over? What do you think it accomplished?
I think it's accomplished a lot. I think we're about halfway, right? I think they have some meetings tomorrow as well. I don't know what was on the agenda, but I do know that it was very successful in the sense that I listened to those two speeches today, and I heard a lot of common ground. I heard a tremendous amount of optimism, particularly on our shared future and shared priorities. And I think that's my big takeaway, is that this is the first time, obviously, that I've ever been a member of Parliament when a President of the United States has come through, and I'm very inspired, to be honest, and I didn't expect to be. I didn't expect to be sitting there and just be like a little bit wide-eyed the whole time. The number of times that the President said how much we share and talked about how long that relationship has been so strong, and the fact that NORAD is the only binational military agreement of its kind in the world. I've spent a lot of time in the United States. I've spent a tremendous amount of time in Florida and California and Georgia and parts of the world that in many ways don't share some of our values and don't resemble us. We don't have very many palm trees in Milton. But I thought about how much we do in fact share, and the importance of us working together and collaborating has never been more of a home run to me, to use an American baseball analogy.
Awesome.
Thanks, Wyatt.
So Ambassador Cohen, obviously President Biden is now here in Canada. It's a trip that people have been waiting for a long while. What does it mean that he's now here in Canada, meeting with the Prime Minister, etc.?
Well, I think the trip's been a spectacular success. We had a couple of goals for the trip. One was for the President to demonstrate his ongoing friendship with the Prime Minister and his ongoing caring about Canada and the relationship between the United States and Canada. Second was to celebrate the successes of the roadmap over the last 2 years, the tremendous accomplishments that the United States and Canada have been able to make over those 2 years. And then the third was to set out a little bit of a vision for what we're going to do together over the next couple of years. And whether it was the President's remarks at Parliament, which were spectacular, and you could tell how excited Parliament was. And the basic message of those remarks was that when Canada and the United States work together, we're both stronger, we both benefit, we both do better, and we can not only make our countries better, but we can help lead the world to being a better place.
And broadly speaking, what does the trip mean for Canada-U.S. relations?
Well, I think Canada-U.S. relations were pretty strong before the President got here, but I think the President's visit here locked that down. To the extent that Canadians were worried about whether the United States cared about Canada anymore, I think having the President here and listening to him, listening to the passion
with which he spoke about the U.S.-Canada relationship. I think it's reinforced how important Canada is to the United States and how important the United States is to Canada.
So I guess just what are you looking forward to tonight? Obviously, you're a distinguished journalist. Lots of people know who you are. Now, obviously, you're here. A big moment for Canada as the president makes a visit. What does this mean for, the people attending?
I think it's been a long time since we've felt this kind of unity between Canada and the United States. To have the president come here, speak about the historic relationship and the challenges moving forward, it was actually about time, and it was nice, I think. And tonight's a great.
I believe so.
That's good. That's good.
Why don't you just start out by talking about, obviously, President Biden has now basically after this dinner concluded his trip to Canada. What did this trip ultimately accomplish, and do you think it did so?
First of all, thanks very much for the opportunity to connect. It's good to see you again. Whenever we have a foreign leader who comes to Canada, it's important to signal our continued partnership and the ability to work together to advance shared priorities. If you were listening to the President's remarks today, I think you'll identify certain areas where we have concrete opportunities for partnership, particularly when it comes to growing our economy, to protecting the environment, and to advancing solutions to certain challenges relating to our shared security priorities. With this specific trip, there's certain concrete outcomes that we can point to. Obviously, the coalition we're going to jointly lead to combat the opioid crisis that was announced during President Biden's speech today, the progress that we've made on the Artemis mission to help send the first ever Canadian astronaut around the moon during our next phase of space exploration. But for my own part as a Minister of Immigration, of course, having successfully concluded the Safe Third Country Agreement and making the commitment on Canada's part to welcome 15,000 vulnerable people who are fleeing Central and South America or other countries nearby in the hemisphere, we've been able to really use this visit to advance certain concrete files that have been important priorities for both governments.
And just before you go, obviously we've heard a lot about Roxham Road. What has this trip in particular done to move forward and to put that behind us, so to speak?
Well, with the conclusion of the Safe Third Country Agreement, we'll be able to apply the same rules that existed previously at official points of entry in Canada to the entirety of the Canada-U.S. border. That means that there will still be an ability for family members of Canadians to apply who cross the Canada-U.S. border. There will still be exemptions that allow unaccompanied children to make asylum claims in Canada, but the people who had an opportunity to make an asylum claim either in Canada or the United States will be required to do so in the first country in which they land where they have the opportunity to make that asylum claim. That means that I expect the volumes that will cross at Roxham Road as of 12:01 tonight or tomorrow morning will not be anywhere near in the vicinity that they were previously. But at the same time, it's very important that we understand we've also created new regular pathways for people who are vulnerable fleeing the region. 15,000 people who will be able to come and participate in a resettlement process that will bring them safely to Canada. It's really important that we understand a lot of the people who don't choose to be a refugee leave their country of origin, but then face the extraordinary decision of migrating across extremely dangerous landscapes, putting themselves and their families at risk. And my hope is that we'll see fewer people be forced to make that choice, knowing that they have access to potentially new pathways for themselves and their families as a result of the deal, not just advancing the Safe Third Country Agreement, but Canada's commitment to welcome more vulnerable people at the same time.
Well, it is important. It is an important trip. Why? Because it showcased the importance of the relationship between Canada and U.S. And we're friends, allies, and partners. And I think President Biden did an amazing speech today about what unites us. But I think also we have strong deliverables. Maybe the renegotiation of the Safe Third Country Agreement, or again the investments in the Great Lakes. And everything we will be doing in terms of supporting good jobs being created here at home.
And what did this trip do for advancing those relations?
Well, we worked for weeks on this visit to make sure that it would be substantive. And so that's why we're confident that we were able to defend our national interests.